welcome to the podcast, Brian. How are you doing today? I am super stoked to have you on the podcast.
Doing great, David. Yeah, excited to be here. Looking forward to chatting with you. It should be a lot of fun.
I wanted to say I was talking to some people and I was telling them, hey, I have Brian Chambers, a chief architect at Chick-fil-A, jumping on the podcast and he's coming and, he said yes. And they asked me, hey, will you get free Chick-fil-A by the end of it all? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe I
I
should
like
ask
it.
Brian that as the first question before he shines all his awesomeness. So
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely get you like a free Chick-fil-A, like probably not forever. If
yeah.
we gave everybody we talked to free Chick-fil-A forever, I don't think the business would be doing very good. But definitely, I'll send something your way afterwards. We'll get you something.
I'll
Do
take it,
you
man.
do you have the Chick-fil-A one app?
I have the app. Yeah, I
Okay,
mean, I'm
okay.
a
Well, I could probably
avid.
gift you something.
Yeah. I appreciate it. I mean, I want to see what I can get out of this, as much as I can. So
That's the goal, right?
I came prepared.
Yeah,
No,
100%.
but yeah, I just want to break the ice with like talking about that, because I mean, I'm a big fan of Chick-fil-A. Like that we go to two fast food chains, as a family, and Chick-fil-A is our number one spot to go to. And the second one is Subway, actually. So the whole family knows the fact that I'm talking to somebody from Chick-fil-A. So it's very
Oh,
exciting. So
that's awesome.
and
Well,
yeah. So
Well,
let's
maybe
jump
we can
into
get
it,
you some
right?
T-shirts after or something to send you a little thank you for having me on. That'll be great. I'll work on that.
Oh, no, I mean, even if you don't do it, I mean, I'm just stoked to have you on the podcast, man. So it's
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's jump into it. Like, and I was just researching you, and we spoke, last time we, met, and we're just kind of preparing for, okay, we're going to jump on the podcast. So you've been with Chick-fil-A for about 19 years, wearing different technical hats, and now you are the chief architect there. Tell me about how you started, how it all began, how you got into Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not required to work at a Chick-fil-A restaurant to work at Chick-fil-A Corporate, but that is part of my path. So when I was in college, I was here in Georgia. I live in Metro Atlanta area, and during the summers, I would work at one of the local restaurants close to my family's house, and just came to really appreciate a lot of the values of the company. It's actually a really fun place to work. I think it's probably many degrees more hectic and challenging today than even it was back then. But one of the requirements I always look for in a job was something that was like, I'm never going to be bored. That was my goal. I don't want to be like in a job where you just stand there and like wait for somebody to come to you. I had one of those at Best Buy one time. It was super boring, but Chick-fil-A was my job after that. And Chick-fil-A was never boring. Like there was always something to do. There are always people to serve. The drive-through, like, or bagging orders on a Saturday morning in like a suburban area. It was just like super busy, super engaging, really fun. And there were just like a lot of good people who worked there and were part of it. So when I finished school, Chick-fil-A actually interviewed on campus at the University of Georgia where I went. And so I kind of followed that path of interviewing and got a couple offers, accepted the Chick-fil-A one, like, immediately when it was given. And I guess the rest is history. I can tell you more about some of the roles I've been through and how things have changed, but that's sort of the story of how I got there, at least.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Like it's like a dream job for somebody who's started way early, and has an experience in the store, and now you're doing stuff for that store, and it's been amazing just to hear that. Um, what is it that excited you? The first thing, like when you joined the company immediately as a software engineer or an architect. Initially, I think you joined as a data engineer. What was the first role
Yeah,
you got into? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even really know what you would call it these days. So at the time, we were really divided in IT, which was only, I want to say, about 45 people at the time. We're really divided between like, there's some infrastructure teams, and there was really like a corporate information system side and then a restaurant side. And so I started on the restaurant side, and this is always a fun one. But when I started, we didn't have even what we came to call persistent connections to our restaurants yet, meaning they dialed in a couple times a day to transmit information. So we were in like the dial-up internet days. When we would do support calls, we would actually have to like call the operator on the phone of the restaurant and say, hey, can you run your daily transmission, is what it was called, like the thing that sent their financial data and things like that, or the thing they used to send their purchase orders. And you just listen while it did the little, dial-up internet noise. I won't do that for the podcast, but you get the dial-up internet noise and you'd start a ping so you could see when it actually connected. And then once it came up, you could like remote in. So anyway, point being is we had this whole restaurant side with databases that ran, as like kind of client server applications on a local machine that ran in the back of the store. I guess edge computing before it was a thing, maybe,
Yeah.
and then point of sale as well. So I did a lot of work on those systems, a lot of database stuff, a lot of SQL stuff, replicating databases back to the corporate side across those dial-up connections using some older technologies. So that was kind of the way I started. In terms of what I was excited about, like I really didn't know a lot about the technology world and what was even possible. So I was probably more excited about like Chick-fil-A as a brand, Chick-fil-A as a company that treated people great,
Right.
had experienced great things working there and heard great things about the corporate side. And so I kind of just learned a lot about what was possible, I think, over the first couple of years of my career. Had a lot of fun with what I did. Got to talk to a lot of restaurants and be close to a lot of systems that were part of what really made the business go. And then kind of build on top of that and learn from there. So it's kind of a weird start, I guess. I did a little bit of software engineering, but a lot of it was like support and database, like I said. So kind of a weird, non-traditional start to a role, but it was really great to kind of lay a foundation where I understood like kind of how the business worked and also, got to use technology skills as well. And that combination of the two, I think, is really critical to doing architecture well. So, 19 years later, I think both of those things still like, kind of serve me really well.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, it's great to know like how it all comes together, right? So I was just thinking, Chick-fil-A has this amazing success story, and I recently read an article that Chick-fil-A is nearly reaching 19 billion in sales, and that's like 19 years ago, around about the time you started, which is like a billion. So I was like curious to understand how did this massive growth happen, and how much did modernization, technology, and innovation play to enable this growth, because to what you were saying, like you had a really small tech shop and this massive growth to 19 billion in sales. How
Yeah.
did all that come together?
Yeah, we were around a billion, just over a billion. They just celebrated that when I started.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of growth, almost $1 billion a year, basically, is what it ends up amounting to. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, I hope anyone from Chick-fil-A that you asked that question would have a similar answer. And I think it starts with the fact that the model that Chick-fil-A uses with having like what we say local ownership of a meaningful brand. You've got an owner operator who exists in that restaurant who's actually involved in the day to day. They're not absentee owner. They care. They care about the business. They care about the team members that work there. They care about serving the customers. I think that's really foundational to who Chick-fil-A is as a business, and it's really the thing that has allowed us to grow and scale the model we have while maintaining great quality and consistency of experience and things like that. Like it really comes back to that person. But from a technology perspective, I think over the past probably especially like 5 to 7 years, we've started to hit some growth inflection points that make, getting bigger really challenging. So most of our restaurants these days are probably doing somewhere in the like 2 to 5x the volume that we expected them to do when they were designed and built. And so that creates a lot of challenges. If you think about capacity, guest throughput, really any system, right? Any system will break when it's
Yeah.
potentially break, at least when it's 3 to 5x what was intended. So that's where technology, I think, has started to become a really big deal. Like there's really not many things that we do today in our business that don't have some technology element, whether it's maintaining relationships with people via technology, which we're all really used to these days, or the systems that help us operate the business. And so um, stuff like cloud computing, IoT, building out an edge footprint, connecting all of our kitchen equipment, all these stories probably a lot of people have heard from our blog or other places. A lot of those things are really things that we've had to do to employ technology to help us solve problems of kind of growth and scale. They're the kind of problems you want. They're
Yeah.
good problems, but we're really, I think, leaning more and more on technology to make sure that we keep really great food quality, that we understand how well we're doing at serving customers. I mean, obviously, digital orders through the Chick-fil-A One, app and ecosystem is becoming a huge part of our business. Third parties, partners we have with DoorDash or others. So that kind of stuff, I think, has become really huge, and it's been something that's allowed us to continue to grow, as opposed to, I think, maybe reaching a plateau at each restaurant level and then having to go with some sort of strategy where we have to keep building more and more restaurants in an area, which actually is not great for our model because we really care about protecting the sort of the area around a store for that owner operator. So that goes right back to kind of full circle. I think it's really about the people and making sure those people continue to have a great, meaningful business opportunity. So technology is just a way that we're able to help them, keep growing, hopefully be a good force multiplier, and keep scaling with the demands that come from the customers. So we're happy to do that. It's a good challenge, and the kind of problem, like I said, that we want to be wrestling with and that we want to have.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you were saying, I was just thinking, right? Like in response to that, like you were talking about that whole experience that you're creating. And I know when I was researching, I found that, the average car wait time at Chick-fil-A is about 5, which is the highest in the fast food chain. And based on some of the data I found. And the average total time to serve these cars in line is 107 seconds, which is the shortest when it comes to so that means Chick-fil-A has the longest line but the shortest serving time. And this goes back to and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more about what you guys do to enable that experience, like edge computing and collecting all of that data in the IoT space. And I was hoping to come back to that, but before we get there, I wanted to talk to you about like your role as a chief architect, right? So you've seen this evolution within Chick-fil-A driven by growth and demand over the last, say, 19 years. And parallelly, we in the tech space have seen interesting trends, that have come, like cloud technologies or, open source technologies. We have had SQL to NoSQL to now distributed SQL databases, container orchestration, and Kubernetes, which I know you're really passionate about, to serverless technology. And now we're talking about generative AI, right? So tell me
Yeah.
more about how has Chick-fil-A gone about adopting some of these trends into the architecture over the 19 years? And now that you're the chief architect also, how do you look at all of this kind of coming together as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's been a different answer at different points in time, but I kind of see that same inflection point where technology became really critical to the business success. It also is around the same time that I think we shifted from what maybe I would call a traditional kind of legacy technology mindset, like a lot of the big middleware platforms, and not a lot of like custom software development from scratch in a programming language like Go or Java or whatever. Not a lot of front end development, like little bits of it, but we did a lot of buying and a lot of like big traditional enterprise middleware, type solutions, and that worked for a season. But in that time period we're talking about, call it 8 years ago, we started to make some culture shifts in terms of how we were going to do technology, and we shifted a lot towards, hey, we're going to need to be able to build our own software, from scratch, deploy things into the cloud, which is just emerging, around that time period. A lot of those, solid Amazon services and such were kind of hitting like full swing, and the pace of innovation really picked up there around that time period. So we knew that to get where we were going to ultimately need to go, we were going to have to build that muscle and start building custom things internally. And when you do that, there's all kinds of stuff that you embrace in the process. And so for us, like kind of the cloud computing, along with adopting, a form of DevOps. I know we could talk about what that is and what that means
Yeah.
pretty endlessly, but trying to have, product focused engineering teams that were autonomous, didn't have outside dependencies wherever possible. And then we're focused on like rapid iteration, agile development, getting feedback quickly, small features, et cetera. So we embraced that methodology. We built up a lot of software engineering, first through like hiring contractors, to be honest, but over time, staff. I mean, so we probably went from 5 or 6 software engineers, 8 years ago, to, I don't know, 150 or 200 plus at least that many, contractors and partners. So quite small to quite sizable. We kind of embraced all those things at the same time, and it sort of let us do some things that I think surprised the business in terms of being able to deliver some solutions rapidly, or just solve some problems that either were attempted before and failed, or just like things that didn't scale as well. So we were able to kind of pick the right things, I think, at the right time, and let that take us some places. And then for me, philosophically, when I think about how we look at what's new, I'd say we chart a course like that we believe in and that we can observe the results of, and then watch it and look for places where there's pain, where there's challenges, where we can iterate. And then of course also be watching the tech landscape and see like, is there something that solves problems that we have? Maybe that's not our biggest problem, but it's like, if we just shift over this direction, we're actually setting ourselves up for like the next 5 big things that are going to be beneficial to us. So really just trying to kind of think of it as navigating. I don't think there's usually right answers in this kind of work. I think it's
Right.
really what is going to work for your current situation. And so that context is super important. So I just try and keep that context front of mind and then watch that landscape, both the business one and the tech one, and see what makes sense. And then we test a lot of things too. Some of it's intuition and some of it's just, hey, let's try this out and see what kind of value it produces. And then we'll see at the end, was that a good idea and should we scale it? Or was it a good idea because it was an idea, but it's not going to work.
Right.
So let's shelve it or, discard it or whatever. So that's kind of the way that I think we've evolved since. And that's brought us a lot of places, from edge computing, IoT, generative AI, all the stuff you mentioned.
Right. So I was just curious, like you were mentioning you went from 5 developers or software engineers to 150, and now you have a very strong, enterprise architect team, and then you're leading chief architects as well, in your role and in that capacity. How do you handle, developers coming to you and say, well, I want to start using, say, Spark to process all our data, and how
Yeah.
do you make those decisions on a day-to-day basis as to like what does your team kind of do to handle those things?
Yeah, no, that never happens. Everybody just uses exactly what we told them before. No, not at all. I mean, this is a frequent thing, of course. So, like one thing I think is super important is like our architecture team is great. We have some super smart people with a ton of great experience, but not every great idea that comes to Chick-fil-A will come from our team. They will come from all over the place. They'll come from operators in field. They'll come from other engineers. They'll come from all over the place. So we know that we don't have a monopoly on good ideas, and we need to see where. And we also aren't experiencing a lot of the pain that like a particular team might be experiencing. So we don't have a firsthand knowledge of the problem. Sometimes we may understand it, but we may not be in it. So a lot of great ideas are going to come from other places, 100% for sure. So we see this all the time, and what we try and do is it's a little bit of a art for us right now. Like we're trying to put some more structure around like what actually would be a proof of concept. Like, hey, we want to do a POC with this thing. What does that actually mean? Like, what are you testing? So sort of like scientific method. Like, what's your hypothesis? How are you going to test that? What's going to happen at the end? What if we decide it doesn't make sense to go forward? Like you loved it, but it's not a good fit right now. Can you roll it back? What will that look like? So we're trying to put some more rigor around that process right now because I think we've gotten big enough and we have enough ideas that are going all the time that we potentially could have like stuff diverging all over the place. It
Right.
wasn't as much of a problem when we were smaller because we could manage it relationally. We're having to start managing it with process a little bit more. But we try and take an approach of like, okay, let's hear out the idea. Let's see, does it potentially make sense? Could it be a solution just for a team, or would it be more widely applicable to the enterprise? And then, same thing. Let's try it out. Let's see what we learn, and kind of evaluate from there. So we have like a innovation process internally that we use that I think is pretty good for just putting structure to things like this. It's understand, what is the problem, what's the nature of it. Imagine, what possible solutions could exist to this problem. Prototype. Let's try some stuff out. And then that's kind of the pause. And then after that, we validate and then we launch. So we're cool with a lot of understand, imagine, prototype work as long as we get to that validate stage and say, okay, does this make sense for us? If it's just going to be a single product team, we don't really care as much. Try and give them autonomy to pick what works for them, pick the programming languages, pick the infrastructure, pick as much as they can within some guardrails. But if it's going to be shared, then it needs to be cohesive, especially if it's stuff that potentially hits our physical restaurant, like something compute related, something machine learning related. We don't want like 5 different edge compute solutions that are all siloed, all taking up space and people trying to figure out where to plug them in, those kind of things. So
Yeah.
trying to guard the human experience of technology, I think is what it ends up being a lot. You could call it governance, which is like the dirty word for it, but I like to think of it more as what we really want to do is make sure we don't get a muddy, messy
Yeah.
experience for people. And then also, back ourselves into corners where we can't do things that will help the business because we've built silos in our architecture. So
Right.
that's kind of the approach we take. And it is evolving because we're, continuing to grow, but that's kind of where we're at in the journey so far.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a key, right? Like with companies that are scaling, and I mean, right now we have seen trends around serverless technology, and everybody's like, "Well, I want to do a POC," and folks are like, "Well, let's start with serverless because it's great to start off, right?" And then suddenly, when the economics of scale come in, you start debating if that makes sense. And I don't know if
Yeah.
you know about this. Amazon recently came out and said that, "Hey, we are going back from serverless to monolithic for Amazon Prime," and and there's this whole idea of build versus buy. How do you, like, being a chief architect, make that decision where once you see a POC you're like, well, we've seen enough at this point. What do we do now? Do we continue on that path of say serverless and POC, or should we go back? Like, how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I'd say definitely we're pushing back as many of the decisions as possible to the teams where it makes sense. But when it is more of an enterprise item, I think we're really looking at the particular technology or the solutions uh, impact and fit into the full enterprise architecture of the organization. Like number one would be like alignment with our principles, which are things like you just mentioned build buy. We have a principle around that. We can come back to it if you want, but like being loosely coupled in nature, and composable, making sure that we think about, we say treat data as an enterprise asset, but does this fit from a data perspective? Does it make sense? Is it going to be something that will work in terms of fitting the overall organization's architecture? So I think it's a little bit of just the art of looking at what it is and does it do a good job at what it's supposed to do, and then does it make sense in light of what we already have, not overly duplicative, and then kind of does it feel like it fits? Does it feel like it's going to add value? Does it make sense? Can we run and support it with somebody, like if we adopt it? All of those kind of questions come into play, but probably the principal evaluation side of it is a big part that we don't do like by writing it down on a piece of paper and like scorecarding it, but it's just sort of like I think those principles are pretty ingrained in us in the way that we work. So they're a thing that can help us make sure that we're objective in our evaluation. So I think that's how it works. It's a little bit art instead of science still, but probably will continue to move towards science as we grow, as a lot of things have to.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm just taking a pivot a little bit to some of the things that we were discussing, right? Over the 19 years, right? And cloud has become a big integral section of infrastructure and even the operating budget for a company. So I know that for you, cloud first is something that you have recently started adopting. How did that come about? How long did that take? And what really changed where you were like, well, it seems like cloud is something integral to our growth and substantial revenue growth as well.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that got us into cloud. This is in that 8 years ago ish time frame. Definitely needing to be able to do things that we could not do with our traditional data center very easily. Horizontal scale, for example, with our customer, digital experience that we launched, the Chick-fil-A One app, and all the other online properties and all the identity, management, all the things that went with that. So I think that was definitely a really huge impetus for needing cloud. It was like we broke our ability to execute in the way that we executed historically. So that's really good, good impetus for change. And then probably very similar story would be in the analytics space, where up until cloud, analytics equaled like Oracle, enterprise data warehouse database with ETL loads going in every night and people hammering it all day, running queries,
Yeah.
and struggling to do a lot of the more sophisticated things that they wanted to be able to do. So like step one for us into cloud and analytics was Redshift. Um, that actually got us doing a lot of like custom software development around like data pipelining, and managing some of our key data sets like our restaurant transaction stream. It used to be just a file actually, and then it moved to a stream probably within the first year or two, something like that. So I think those were like the impetus for actual adoption. And then our strategy very quickly was, yeah, to do this, we can actually, like, instead of having operational teams manage infrastructure, like everybody used to do, and sending off an email or filling out a form to request like a virtual machine, it's like, hey, you can get a team that knows how to work with APIs and they can spin up their own, environment, following some standards. And we ended up automating a lot of that, but spin up an Amazon account and, go from idea to working and building something, in the first day or two, a little bit of design work as well. But that was, I think, really compelling when we could do that. And now, of course, that can be taken too far. And I think we got to a point where we probably had engineering teams that were overburdened with a number of things they need to be concerned with, like building their app and building features and maintaining and operating their app and thinking about infrastructure and patching nodes and things like that. So like I think you can definitely go too far if you don't do enough automation at least, and don't really invest in things like your pipelines and stuff like that to make that stuff easy. But yeah, that was really the thing that kicked us over. And once we got there and saw some of that value in the customer and analytics space, we really started ramping up, product teams. We started hiring engineers. And for a while there, it felt like every couple months there was like a new product team that we're spinning up and staffing, and they were building things in the cloud, in their own environment at their own speed and pace, doing agile DevOps, et cetera, and delivering value. And I think that was contagious, and it just grew from there. I think we're, probably 80 plus teams, just guessing, across Chick-fil-A, maybe more. Try not to exaggerate, but now we've got quite a bit. And cloud is definitely the first choice, really probably the only choice for us, and where we build, pretty much everything. So SaaS solutions are great too, and we don't really care where they run if they're SaaS, but in terms of custom software development, things we're building for ourselves, it's really cloud first. And then the other thing would be the edge, if it makes sense to be running in a restaurant, but we can get to that later if you want.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I was just thinking, like, I personally, like, when I started using cloud, it's mostly AWS, and even in my function, I do focus on AWS stuff a lot. And the ease and the simplicity that, infrastructure in the form of a SaaS solution that the cloud provided was intense. For me, like, I wanted to do something, I would just go spin up a compute machine and start doing things on it, rather than
Yeah.
running it on my Windows machine and struggling to see how the prototype worked. But at some point that changed with, of course, Kubernetes coming in, containers and Dockers. That also helped. But in the context of what you do at Chick-fil-A, I was just trying to think about, with the growth that the company is expecting, definitely cloud brought in a lot of value, right, for you to have the scale to innovate. But when you start designing things and even looking it out in the future, what are some of the key features that you are really looking for as you design new software, or look at designing infrastructure architecture?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's like some super obvious ones to me, like everything we look at, API enablement is like no brainer, right? Like you can't do a lot without that. I've tried to do, integration even for like a friend's nonprofit thing before on a system with like no APIs, and you're just like, it's so frustrating.
What's going
So
on?
to me,
Yeah.
that's like obvious, but like you got to do the basic stuff well for anything else to matter. So that's huge. Definitely, when we think about things that we buy, our strategy tends to be we're looking to build things that are unique. It's a unique problem we have, or there's something about the way our business works where the thing doesn't really fit, and then we're looking to like pick things off the shelf for as many of the other cases as possible. So, looking for, if we're building, we're looking for components, I think, that give you like a good solid foundation, like not overly complex, but like reasonable abstractions, that make things, I guess, more like consumable and understandable. And really, like, also, I think we're starting to trend into some of the things that just make life easier. Like you
Yeah.
can do anything you want, with a cloud account, pretty much, like given time. But a lot of that work is not necessarily the thing that differentiates us. So like we don't need to be the world's greatest at like ingress or messaging or whatever else. So trying to pick things that are that are services that we can build on top of and still sort of express the uniqueness of Chick-fil-A and some of the solutions, but also not spend a lot of energy and time on things that maybe we can get elsewhere, even if they're like part of composing that solution. So I'd actually say that like building something completely from scratch is super rare for anyone, right? Like most people are going
Right.
to be stitching together open source with some custom stuff. The actual like business logic of their app is probably unique to them, but they're building on some kind of foundation. We're all kind of like benefiting from all the stuff that the community is doing. And so, we're the same. We try and leverage all that stuff, and kind of build like layers, that make sense and that are still like reasonable, if not easy, to operate in the process. I don't know. How about you? How do you think about it?
No, I think in the similar way, whenever I am trying to design something, and previously, I used to like put stuff together, but then as APIs start coming, as we start thinking about microservices and even nano services, right? Like my philosophy also personally is building things in a way that they can be reused across multiple teams, and making changes is way more easier. You don't have to bring things down, you know. Apart from these things, like I personally, when I'm and the kind of situations I've been in, typically I have to also consider scale or high
Mhm.
availability and avoiding downtimes. And my experience was working with lots of use cases where IoT use cases where infrastructure couldn't go down. So I've worked with a company where they had pipelines where oil is getting generated, right? And they had to get the telemetry data, and you're talking about tens of thousands of transactions happening per second, and you needed scale, and you have to make sure that data is correct because it can affect the gas prices next day, affecting how much I have to pay. So it was critical business. So the ability to
Yeah.
for the infrastructure to scale, for the app to scale, and high availability and avoiding downtimes was equally important in the design process. But I do agree with you. The whole idea of composability, or the Lego based design philosophy is, I think, the right approach, and I don't think we should be going back from that. That's how I look at
Yeah.
it. Just based on that, I know you have different systems that you work on as well at Chick-fil-A, like POS system, and you have to think about supply chain and getting the right ingredients and stuff to each of these restaurants or locations that you have. And then you have mobile apps and all these different. How important is scale, high availability, or zero downtime to different use cases? And maybe you can take one of those and kind of help folks who are listening, who are interested in designing similar systems, to kind of think about how to approach them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the most obvious and easy to understand for listeners would be what we do from a Chick-fil-A One backend perspective. So that's tangible, right? It's a mobile app. You can order from it. You can manage your profile. There's loyalty program, all of those kinds of things, and that's like super important to scale because we do things like the campaign that we've had the last couple of weeks that generate huge amounts of traffic, even beyond what's normal for us, during like a lunch rush or something like that. So some of
Right.
these marketing campaigns are the biggest drivers, especially when there's something free involved. They drive huge amounts of traffic. So downtime in those scenarios is really bad because one, it's a bad experience for the customer, and two, it generally results in lost revenue, right? Like if we can't take those orders, maybe people just come to the store and go inside. We don't really know that, but probably some people we lose for that particular occasion, which we don't like. So we want to be up all the time, right? So definitely that would be a place where those are really important factors. We've pretty much always been at least like in Amazon multi AZ in all of our solutions from the beginning. But things like this are where, thinking about multi-region, either active-active or active-passive, type solutions make a lot of sense. So I think that's one big thing in the customer-facing domain for us that's different than a lot of our other systems is it has to scale in those ways. All our stuff that faces our operators and team members kind of has like a known load. It doesn't change a lot. There's nothing that's going to create huge bursts. We probably get actually a lot. Our second biggest place for scale is probably actually IoT telemetry data coming from
Right.
the stores through our IoT and edge compute platform. As opposed to any of our other like sort of business systems. So I think customers number one, and then that would be number two. But yeah, in those cases, I think it's like there's a bunch of different tiers to it, and depending on what you're trying to accomplish, and how much persistence is important, or if you're using some sort of like streaming ingest, like a Kinesis or something in Amazon, or like
Yeah.
some sort of queuing architecture, do you care about replay? If something happened and you failed in processing, like you need to jump back in the stream. Are you okay to process once, and say if we fail while processing, we'll either handle it or do some sort of acknowledgement that we've actually successfully pulled the message from a queue. There's all those kinds of things that, depending on how critical each phase of the architecture and the associated process behind it, actually are, you might make different decisions and different trade-offs. So I think like, lots of nodes, clustered, something like Kubernetes doesn't have to be, but something like that is sort of like a no-brainer for a critical high scale application. Kubernetes scales container applications really, really nicely. So for all the
Right.
things that people hate on it for lately and the complexities and all those things, it does that really well,
Yes.
really, really
I
well,
agree.
and
Yeah.
gives you a lot of power. So I think that kind of thing is a no-brainer. I think at least being in multiple data centers is a complete no-brainer. Hopefully, spread out across multiple regions in some sort of form, and then it starts getting into the application components, beyond maybe like a single container, and like, so what's your persistent strategy? How are you going to scale that? Is it going to be multi-region? How do you deal with all the problems that come with that? Um,
Right.
the cap theorem stuff and all that. And same for messaging, same for anything. So yeah, I think it ultimately depends a little on the nature of the solution. But those are some of the components I think that are pretty critical. And then, I mean, one more would just be we talked about microservices and the Amazon switch from serverless and microservices to monolith. I think in a lot of cases there's a lot of merit to that, because all of those, microservices, nanoservices, whatever, those are dependencies that you have to hold in your head and understand how is this all going to operate together, reason about if they break, or build automation around. And I think the more pieces you have, just by nature, the more complex it actually is. It
Right.
may be needed to actually accomplish, the solution to the problem that you're facing, but like keeping that, I think, to a minimum is actually the right way to do it. Like minimum number of services to actually accomplish the goal. And as the problem changes or your scale grows and you have to carve things off, that's a perfectly good thing to do. But like not jumping to too many services too quickly, I think is something that would benefit a lot of teams. So it may not be like single artifact monolith if you're of any significant size, but it probably isn't 150 services that are all interacting with each other in real time to accomplish anything, unless you have a really unique, really, really big problem.
Yeah.
And I don't think most people probably run across those on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking, like, when you were talking, like, the amount of experience you have, real life experience dealing with these problems, definitely is clear now that you have a chief architect role. You definitely know what you're talking about because you've experienced those things. For everyone listening, Brian's got a fantastic Substack, which has got a really cool name, which is called, the Chamber of Tech Secrets, where you have some fascinating blogs around different topics that you can go in and even unravel all these things that we're talking about. I mean, even a podcast sometimes doesn't do it justice unless we're talking for 6 hours, right?
Right,
And
right.
So definitely go check that out. And you've written some really great blogs, even on your Medium blog post for Chick-fil-A. And from there, I wanted to go back to some of the things that you were mentioning. That is the retail edge piece, which was fascinating for me when I started reading about it after I spoke to you. You're talking about edge compute in location in restaurant, where we're
Correct.
talking about a Kubernetes infrastructure set up in a restaurant. So help the people who are listening understand, like, what is this project and what led to this and what value is it bringing on a day-to-day basis to folks at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, edge computing can mean a lot of things. So we really mean, it depends where you position yourself. But if you position yourself in the cloud, you could refer to it as the far edge.
Far edge,
And for
yes.
us, that is living in each of our restaurants. So what we have really fast is a 3-node, Intel NUC Kubernetes cluster. It's K3s actually, running on top of that. We did a bunch of things with that stack that we can come back to if there's time, but try to make it as like zero touch as possible for the restaurant. So basically, it's like you plug it in and everything happens by it reaching out and talking to like our control plane stuff in the cloud. Jumping over to like why we did that. It really was born out of going back to the start of our conversation. We talked about that capacity challenge. We had a thing we call a big move, a thing that we try and rally around across the organization that we're all trying to disproportionately focus our energy on. That was around restaurant systems capacity, not technology systems, but actually just like, producing food, bagging food, taking orders, et cetera. So, and, supply chain, all those kinds of things. And there's been a whole bunch that came out of that. But one of the things was we started to pursue making all of the devices that we have, especially starting in the kitchen, because that's where a lot of capacity constraints exist. We started getting those things to be connected. I say connected and not smart because we intentionally decided that we didn't want them to be smart. What we wanted them to do was basically just collect telemetry and then have the ability to take commands and push that out. So there were solutions though where it was like, well, we need these things to interact with each other in some way. We need to do some sort of like algorithm thing, may not be sophisticated, just like mash the data together, evaluate something, make a decision, and display something to a person so they can take action. Like, where are we going to do that? So I remember somebody talking about trying to send the real-time stream of sales transactions like to a fryer. It's like, no. We don't want to do that. Instead, let's figure out a place that we can collect all this data. So let's get the transaction data coming in. Let's get all the telemetry coming from the equipment. We'll make the decision somewhere externally. And if the equipment needs to know something, we'll push it back to it. And so, where do you put that? You need some sort of infrastructure. We explored, cloud first, but really just wasn't viable based on latency, availability. I'll come back to that in a second, but it just didn't make sense for us. So we went with ultimately what's now called an edge compute solution. It wasn't really much of a term at the time. I actually read like terms like fog computing back then, which is completely dead, it seems like now. But we ended up with an edge architecture to have a place basically to mirror the cloud paradigm as much as was possible. So container-based applications, deployed to each of the restaurants and able to consume telemetry data, all of it pretty much over MQTT, and then like API calls out to the cloud or to other apps internally, and then do things, make decisions, and then drive some behavior in the restaurant. So like an early example, we have an article on the blog about it. It was called AHA, which was Automated Holding Assistant. And its job was basically, it's kind of a cool solution. It's got like a 3D camera sitting above where they check in a pan of chicken. So like it can kind of count and get an estimate, usually pretty accurate, of how many pieces of chicken are in the pan. And we know there's 12 fillets in breakfast pan 1. And it auto manages like the timers that we use for food quality. So the team members don't have to think about doing that. They don't have to like go push buttons or any of those kinds of things. It was just one of those like old school approaches before that didn't really scale very well and didn't get used very often. So to try and help understand where we were with food quality, to make sure that it stays great and make it easier on the team members, we built that solution on top of this architecture. And then there's been some others since. And then it's also the hub for like collecting all of the data that exists in restaurant, whether it's very soon it'll be like point of sale included, directly. So it'll be sending things through that channel, as well as all the equipment. It's grown to a bunch of devices. I think we get over 1 billion data points a month of restaurant telemetry. So not insane, but it's a pretty good amount.
It's
and
lot,
it continues to grow.
So what you're doing here in this case is, and it's fascinating because I love this kind of stuff, is you have telemetry data coming from, say, fryers or what's going on and different devices and equipments to the infrastructure that you've set up with K3, and then and that's coming through the MQTT protocol, and then this data all is pushed to the cloud. Is that what's happening eventually?
Yeah. So if we're in an online situation, like network is up, which is most of the time, then we would be exfilling data out to the cloud. We send pretty much all the MQTT events out. And then when it comes to like apps that run at the edge, it could be something that's built by the core like platform team. Like they've got an auth service that lives there, so they can do some tricky stuff with like re-signing tokens if we're offline. And MQTT itself. And so they've got a series of services, but like AHA is built by another one of our teams. And we have another team that like smart equipment ecosystem stuff. So those teams are building their own container-based applications, and the platform team is providing them tooling to basically get that in. And then we also, if you're actually going to operate anything in 3,000 locations, you need the sort of the system telemetry info as well. So you're like metrics collected by Prometheus and logging in certain situations. Like we pretty much stay in error only logging unless we flip a switch for a period of time at a restaurant to go to debug and then flip it back. So we do some things like that, collect that data and send that back out as well. But essentially we get back to the cloud to do like analytics across multiple restaurants or all restaurants, store it in our data lake longer term, to get other value out of it. But we also use it in real time in the restaurant to drive experiences, which is why the availability side is important, because if these solutions are good and they actually make the team members' jobs easier and they come to depend on them, we really need to make sure that they're mostly available during business hours.
Yeah.
And while internet connections are pretty good, we just have a lot of stores, and cables get cut while they're doing construction, or providers have outages. We're resilient to that stuff, and we're as available as our local network, or if we have any issues with a Kubernetes cluster or something, but we're pretty
Right.
fast at fixing those. So it's pretty
Yeah.
available, which was one of the other key design goals, and why we did that versus trying to use cloud directly.
Oh, that's awesome. The only other scenario would be like a Chick-fil-A, person working there wants to charge his phone and just detaches the socket
Yeah,
out.
it's
Like,
happened. It's happened. Yeah, we've had them unplugged, but there are three of them, and they're all in different
yeah,
switches and things like
but they
that. So
kind of work.
the cluster stays up, but the node goes bye bye when that happens.
I mean, yeah, I love when stuff is put together in cluster, right? Even with Cockroach, right? Like one of the most fascinating things is that we provide a consistent database which is split across multiple nodes in a cluster across multiple regions, right? So
Yeah.
scenarios like where this can be used is always exciting for me to hear. So we were talking about data, right? And as we close out, I just wanted to ask a few more questions around. You talked about data being critical with telemetry information coming in. Tell me more about your database landscape and how do you go about choosing this data stack for what or where the data needs to be stored, and the analytics piece of it. I know you mentioned Redshift, but there's also been a big player in the market like Snowflake. And have you ever come across distributed SQL as a need for your requirements and things like? So how do you go about that?
Yeah, it definitely varies a lot, like team to team. So, I mean, I'd say the centers of gravity that we tend to have are a lot of Postgres. So that's probably what most teams that are doing like SQL based databases have on the back end for their applications, or even like I won't say analytics, but like the reporting side of analytics. So I want a fast, fast answer to a known question, that kind of stuff. A lot of Postgres, or like an Amazon Aurora, it's Postgres compliant. So got a number of those things that are out there. Definitely a lot of like DynamoDB when it's NoSQL. I mean, in terms of Amazon services, like a couple of those early ones, EC2 obviously, and S3, but like DynamoDB are just, so good in my opinion. Like
Right.
everything's going to have its limitations, but it's been great. So we use that quite a bit. On the actual analytics side, like we've got a Databricks footprint that's newer, maybe a year old or so. One of the guys on my team, his name's Aaron Reese. He's actually spoken about that recently at a Databricks event, so people might be able to Google and find that if they're
Nice.
interested. But that's part of the architecture as well. Redshifts still there in the mix, and then we're always looking at the landscape. So we're doing some exploration with Supabase, which is like the Firebase clone. It's Postgres compatible as well from
Nice.
a syntax perspective, so that's cool. We've looked at Cockroach as well in the past and done some playing around with that. At a team level, it kind of depends a little bit on the nature of the problem,
Right.
and probably to some degree, like what the engineers on that team have experience with and are comfortable with, because they probably do a better job, running technology A that they have lots of experience with, even if maybe there's something that's slightly better than that new one that they've never touched before. So like that comes into play, but it's not the only factor. And sometimes it makes sense to learn something new and change. But yeah, we're kind of always evolving there. I'm sure I've missed tons that we actually use in like isolated
Yeah.
pockets, but
Well, you have like
that's
80
a bunch
teams.
of the stuff we use.
I was gonna say you have like 80 teams, right? At least you're talking about who are working
Yeah,
in
at
different silos.
least. I think there's over 30 in our customer facing space, and
Right.
probably easy 50 beyond that, if not more. So maybe it could be 100, but it's a lot. So, and probably all of them have some sort of database of some kind. So we do run Postgres as an edge in all the stores. So that's a big footprint of Postgres, because that backs our MQTT broker, and we also offer it as a service for persisting data for short time periods for some of the applications that exist at the edge as well. So A lot of Postgres, DynamoDB, Redshift. We've played with Snowflake though, Databricks. We got all kinds of stuff. It's a big landscape.
I know. I mean, I know this is like a can opening kind of a question for which we might need a second podcast. And
Totally.
I know we wanted to keep it short for the first one, right, Brian? I mean, I wanted to ask you, like, as we kind of come to the close, right? Like, are there any upcoming projects that you're really passionate about, or plans you're excited about that you want to share with the listeners, that they can kind of follow you and or check out in different portals, or places?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of things we're working on, or I'm like playing with personally, like I know it's kind of cliche now, but the generative AI thing I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of like tinkering with just playing with OpenAI, API for embeddings and chat completions and things like that. I haven't decided what I'm actually doing yet, but I think like there's a bunch of potential little side projects that would be fun to do, or make your own little assistant just to go through the exercise. I think all the chaining stuff is really interesting too, like LangChain and things like that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the stuff that I think is interesting to play with right now, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of things I haven't done hands on before, but it's like honestly pretty easy. I mean, if you can call an API and like read some code and start tweaking it and then do experimentation to kind of understand anything that you didn't understand, like it comes together pretty rapidly, which is pretty cool. So I think I'm excited that there's like a bit of the democratization of some of the AI capability via
Right.
APIs to like anyone who can write code, or even people who just have an idea and they need to ask like a chat engine, a chat GPT, like how do I write code to do this? Like if you know how to ask the right questions, you can get the right answers, at least to a pretty high degree of success. So I think that's really, really cool and will really change the way that the tech world works in a lot of ways. But I don't think it's going to change everything either. Like you're still going to need a good architecture mindset. You're still going to need to know what good code is. You're still going to have to know how to operate systems. You still have to know how to pick a database. You still have to know how to use a database. It can
Right.
help you with all the syntax, but you still got to know the stuff. So I just see it as a cool force multiplier going forward, and don't want to be left behind. So I'm
Yeah.
hands on as well and learning.
No, that's good. I mean, we are part of the same community, is what I would say. Like in my free
Yeah,
time, that's all I'm doing. I'm testing some stuff with LangChain and some
yeah,
Cockroach stuff as well. I think it's fascinating.
cool.
I don't know if you know, like yesterday, OpenAI came out and said, okay, the browser plugin is no more available. I think they found like an error or an issue where some fraud could happen. So that's
Oh,
gone for a few days. So it's a bummer because I was using that a lot.
just trying to use
Uh,
it.
Here's one fun, really fun use case of how I'm using it. And me and my wife, we're on this smoothie, diet based plan. So what we did was we
Okay.
asked ChatGPT give us a 21-day smoothie weight loss program or whatever that is, and it came up with a proper plan. And then I used the Instacart plugin that is available on ChatGPT, and it got me an ingredients list with a link. And when I click on that link, it takes me straight to Aldi or a
Yeah.
Sprouts where I can directly get. So when I looked at it, I was like, this is fascinating. It is, because now you're looking at API AI going more than being just a productivity tool, right? So it's
Hmm.
fascinating. And so we'll come back and we'll dive into this again. I just wanted to say, as we close, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the Big Ideas in App Architecture podcast. I mean, your knowledge about things and what you've worked on over 20 years is fascinating. I am going to say, everyone who's listening to the podcast, please go follow Brian on his LinkedIn. He does some amazing stuff. He shares a lot. He has this attitude to give and enable the community. And are there any other places, Brian, that folks can follow you on other than your tech secrets Substack and your LinkedIn as well as the blog? Are there any other places they can follow you and kind of learn from you? Is what I would say, if you can
Yeah,
share.
those are probably the main ones. The Substack is brianchambers.substack.com, Chamber of Tech Secrets one. So that's a great place. And then I'm on Twitter as well, BRICHAMB. Not quite as active, but I'm there. So those are
It's
probably
a
the main
tough time
ones.
to be on Twitter right now. So,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
I'm trying to minimize the socials and the distractions and the need for constant dopamine hits every moment of every
that's
day at the moment. So trying to figure out how to get back to being like a normal human who can focus on something for for more than a few minutes without
I agree.
multitasking or changing. So that's one of my my personal quests at the moment that I'm early in, but working on it.
Yeah. No, I think most of us who have been through this over the last decade with social media are going through some sort of a detox and a kind of cleanup process. So, but
Yeah,
again, that's a struggle for all of us, you know. But I thank you again for kind of sharing that. But overall, Brian, thank you once again for hopping on this call. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to more conversations with you, and following all the amazing things that you're working on. So, thank you
yeah.
again.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thanks so much. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and yeah, let's do it again soon.
Awesome.